Now that the election is finally over, we finally know which one of the two oligarch war criminals is going to be leading this country. Now, there's a lot that could be said about this past election, but this video is going to focus specifically on the topic of race and the election. Now, right now, we're seeing a lot of discussion on this topic of the demographics of the voters of this election versus last election, and the issue of racism, and to what extent race and racism played a role in the election of Donald Trump in this election. Both political parties use race and the topic of racism and forms of racism to promote themselves and to disguise their neoliberal capitalist policies, which are hostile to the vast majority of people in this country. They both do this in different ways. The Republicans will utilize racism to try and pit white workers against immigrants, against black people, against other groups such as this, to divide the working class and try and get white workers to side with white ruling class against other sections of the working class that white workers should be allying with. That's a strategy that Donald Trump has used. That's a strategy not original. Donald Trump didn't come up with. That goes back decades and decades, if not centuries, back in the history of the United States. It's just something that Donald Trump and the Republicans are currently using. The Democrats, on the other hand, use the issue of race to claim that they are against racism, even though if you look at their records, it's actually completely false. Now, they may not be as overt in their racism, but if you look at their records of people like Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, you could see that these people are extremely racist and actually promote systemic racism and are key architects of modern forms of systemic racism. So obviously in this past election, Donald Trump ended up winning, Kamala Harris lost, and many on the Democratic Party side are claiming that Kamala Harris lost because of racism and sexism. And they're talking about the white voters. Some of them are talking about white men, white male voters, and demonizing white male voters as a whole. Others are focusing on white women voters and demonizing white women voters as a whole because they, and especially I guess with regard to white women, they're saying, Kamala Harris is a woman. Why wouldn't these white women vote for her? Their fellow woman. Rather than looking at her actual policies and actually how, Kamala Harris's policies were horrible, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense for these people to try and act like Kamala Harris somehow represents women as a whole and that she should automatically be getting the female vote. Obviously, Trump, same goes for Trump. Neither of them should really be getting people's votes. But the idea that, somehow these white people voting for Donald Trump, it must be only racism that's motivating it. It's an interesting argument because if we look at the statistics, if they want to talk about communities supporting Donald Trump, let's look at the statistics because they don't really fit the narrative that they're trying to promote with regards to this past election. So this is from NBC Washington. Article is How Voting Demographics Changed Between 2020 and 2024 Presidential Elections. So if we look at the statistics, a good way we can judge this argument that they're making is to see, we can compare the performance of Joe Biden in 2020 when he was running for president. He's a white man, obviously. Kamala Harris, woman of color, half black, half South Asian. So that should give us a good indication of, whether race played a significant role in this. Well, it's interesting because actually Kamala Harris, the non-white woman, did better with white men and white women than Joe Biden did. So if they're trying to argue that racism was the decisive force in this election, why is it that Kamala Harris did better with white men and white women than Joe Biden did? Another interesting fact about this is that there is a community, a voting group that did better with Trump this time around when it was Trump versus Kamala than during Trump versus Biden. And that is, as you can see here, Latino men and Latino women. Actually, Trump did better with them this election than that election, which is interesting. So this narrative that they're trying to push is refuted by the statistics. And I think the reason why they're trying to push this narrative is because this is how racism, or the issue of race, is utilized by the Democratic Party side. And I'm going to get to how the Republicans and Trump utilize racism, because absolutely, it's definitely true that Trump is racist and promotes racism. But we have to observe what both sides are doing with the question of race. So what the Democrats are trying to do is they're trying to divide the working class and demonize the working class. Because you also notice in a lot of their coverage, they talk specifically about white voters without a college education. So they're trying to attack and demonize poorer, more working class white people, and trying to point to them as the enemy of minorities, when in reality, that's not the case. In fact, poor white people, working class white people, have the same interests as minority working class people. That's just a fact. And that's what the elites, quote unquote, the ruling class, the capitalist class of both parties that back both parties, don't want people to know. They want the working class to think that their enemy is another worker of another race, or, because they're a Trump voter or something, or a Democratic Party voter. They want to divide the working class. And this is how the Democrats do it. And this is what they're trying to promote. They've also said other things. They've also demonized black male voters, tried to say black males are turning to Trump. But actually, the statistics don't really show that. If we look at the statistics again. Now, look, I'm pointing this out to show how the media is lying and how these Democratic Party hacks are trying to distract from the real reasons why they lost the election. And they're trying to divide the working class and get the working class to see each other as enemies based on racial lines. Now, that's not to say that racism is not an issue. Absolutely, there is systemic racism in this country. The prison industrial complex is a perfect example of that. By the way, the Democrats and Republicans are responsible for the growth of the prison industrial complex. Joe Biden bragged about the Biden crime bill. Kamala Harris also, as a prosecutor in California, was very proud. And to this day, she's still, to a large extent, proud of her record. And she describes herself as tough on crime, which we know what that's code language for. Similar to when the Republicans talk about tough on crime, we know what they're actually talking about. That's talking about fueling the prison industrial complex. Now, with regard to the actual racism from Trump and the Republicans, there is actual legitimate points there. And there's a difference between demonizing voters and actually pointing out the racism of Donald Trump and the Republican Party elites. There's a difference there. And if you actually want to win over and get people who are, say, white working class Trump voters, you're not going to do that by demonizing them, number one. And number two, it's the facts just don't back it up in many cases, as I just laid out. But also, what you do is you point out how it's Trump and the Republican Party elites who are promoting this. You don't point the finger at them. You point the finger at the people actually promoting this, which is Trump and the Republican Party elites. So what have they done? Everyone knows about Trump's previous record, where he demonized Mexicans, he demonized Muslim Americans, Arab Americans. Everyone knows about his record with regard to the Central Park Five, calling for the execution of these young black men who were innocent. Even after they were proven to be innocent, he continued to call for their execution. His blanket ban from people from majority Muslim countries, numerous Muslim majority countries. his response to the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. And this election, too, he campaigned on racism. Infamously, his vice president, J.D. Vance, and Trump himself promoted the racist lie that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were eating cats and dogs of people in the community. That turned out to be a complete lie. And I wonder why he said that, right? Because it's interesting. The Republicans like to talk about how, oh, I'm not against immigration. I'm not against immigrants. I'm just for legal immigrants. Immigration is great, but it has to be legal. Well, these Haitian immigrants were there legally, and these claims that Trump and J.D. Vance and Elon Musk and other right-wing hacks were promoting is completely false. No evidence whatsoever. All of the local authorities, everyone in the community said that there's no evidence for this whatsoever. There was no evidence for this whatsoever. It was just a racist lie. And why do you think he was saying this about these Haitians? Do you think it had anything to do with their skin color? Obviously. This is racism being promoted by Donald Trump, and it led to serious issues in the community. There were bomb threats to schools and different institutions in the community. They had to close down schools because of the level of threats that were being sent in because of these racist lies being promoted by Donald Trump. So there certainly is racism from Donald Trump and the Republicans. And anyone who wants to downplay that is a hack for the establishment, for Donald Trump, who is the establishment, just as much as Kamala Harris and Biden are the establishment. And again, what this is a billionaire and a billionaire oligarch neoliberal capitalist party, the Republican Party, trying to divide the working class and cause hatred and hysteria within the working class and foment racial violence between workers. Because again, these Haitian immigrants there are working class. They work working class jobs there, and they are a important pillar of the community. And what Trump is trying to do is to stoke violence against one section of the working class, to divide the working class and prevent the working class from uniting against people like him. Now back to the Democrats. The Democrats don't really have much of a leg to stand on to call Trump a racist, which he is a racist. But what's the record of the Democrats? As I mentioned previously, there's the Biden crime bill, which Biden bragged about. There's Kamala Harris's record in California. There's Hillary Clinton, who famously and infamously referred to black youth as quote-unquote super predators in the 90s. This was around the same time as Joe Biden was pushing forward the Biden crime bill and further criminalizing people in this country, locking up more and more people. And the U.S. at this point has more people in prison than any other country in the world. By raw numbers and percentage of the population, by every measure, it's insane, even more than China or India, which has a way bigger population than the United States. The U.S. has more people in prison than any other country, and as anyone who pays any attention to these things knows, there is a massive, disproportionate amount of black people in prison compared to the population overall. And that is systemic racism right there. And if we want to look at more recent things, what about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's racism against Arabs? There is a literal genocide going on right now in Gaza and Palestine being carried out by the Zionist regime of Israel with a Netanyahu regime, which is explicitly right-wing, openly racist. You have genocidal people in his government, openly, he's genocidal himself, but you have all kinds of people in his government openly talking about genocide, trying to kill all of the Palestinians, ethnically cleansing Gaza, openly talking about ethnically cleansing Gaza and taking it over and moving in and settling like what they've done to the rest of Palestine, trying to do that in Gaza. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have fully been backing this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris gave Israel $18 billion in the past year to carry out a genocide against the Palestinian people of Gaza. $18 billion. At every single turn, they've backed Israel. When Israel bombs hospitals, bombs schools, kills aid workers, deliberately so, kills more journalists than any other war in history, fully backed by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They want to talk about racism. This is an actual genocide being carried out against Palestinian Arabs that they are actively making possible. It would not be possible without Joe Biden and Kamala Harris' support. And let's be clear, Trump fully backs it as well. In fact, his only criticism of it is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris supposedly aren't supporting it enough. So in case anyone wants to try and say that Trump would be any better, hell no. His only criticism of it is that he wants Kamala Harris and Joe Biden to be more genocidal against Palestinians. Now, furthermore, there's not just that, but within the United States, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party has expressed their racism against Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims in this country. And that's one of the big reasons why they lost the election, but that's for another video. I'm going to do another video after this, getting into more in depth about the election and why they lost, all the topics related to that, and Kamala Harris's record, Joe Biden's record, Trump's record. But that's another video. Otherwise, this could go on for more than an hour. So I'm staying on this issue for now, on the issue of race and the election. The Democrats did everything to give the middle finger to the Arab American community and the Muslim community in the United States. One of the most infamous examples of this was during the Democratic Party National Convention. There was a Palestinian woman delegate of the Democratic Party who wanted to speak at the National Convention. And remember, this convention goes on for days, pretty much the whole day. There's so many speakers, there's no issue of there not being enough time. But they prevented her from speaking, even though her speech was a speech endorsing Kamala Harris. Now, from a logical perspective from the Democrats, don't you think that you would want someone from the Palestinian community to give a speech endorsing you when you know that you're in trouble with this community? But despite that practical reason for them that they would want for their own self-interests, but their hatred of Palestinians outweighed their own self-interest. It would have helped them in the election if they had this Palestinian speaker endorse them, because they had an issue with Arab American, Muslim Americans, voters. But they refused to let her speak just because she's a Palestinian. There was another incident where there was a Democratic Party event where they threw out a Muslim American. He wasn't Palestinian. I don't think he was Arab. I think he was some other background, but he was Muslim. And they just threw him out of the event with no explanation given. He wasn't protesting. He wasn't even wearing a Palestinian kufiya or anything. And they just threw him out of the event just because he was Muslim. So the Democrats really have no grounds to stand on to criticize Trump for his racism. Both parties are absolutely racist. And this past year, since October 7th, has exposed the Democrats to also be racist. Now, if you want more information on this issue and the Democrats and all of this that had happened, I recommend you check out a recent conversation that I had with a Palestinian activist who goes by Falastini Muqtarab on my channel. Check out this video. It'll be in the description of this one. Check that out for more on that topic and other issues regarding the genocide going on in Gaza and the resistance to it. Now, another thing that the Democrats might mention with regard to this election and Trump voters is they'll say, oh, Republican voters are racist or they're willing to overlook racism. Well, that's an interesting claim on their part, because Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have been supporting genocide in Gaza for the past year. So according to their logic and their standard, Democratic Party voters are willing to overlook genocide to support them. So again, they really have no grounds to stand on. They want to criticize Republican voters for overlooking the racism of Trump to support Trump. Well, how about Democratic Party voters who are willing to overlook a literal genocide going on to vote for Kamala Harris? So those are my thoughts with regard to what's been going around in the mainstream media and various commentators about the issue of race and the election. There's a lot more that can be said about this election, and I will be putting out more videos on those issues. Particularly, one of the important things to address is this claim that Donald Trump is going to be somehow anti-establishment or less interventionist, or he's going to end the war in Ukraine, or he's going to end the genocide in Gaza. Absolutely absurd claims. And actually, if you want to see more on that now, you could check out my video. It'll also be in the description of this on Donald Trump's actual record in office. But soon I will be putting out more videos on the election and why Kamala Harris lost, why Trump won this election, and the records of Donald Trump and what we can expect going forward and what needs to happen going forward. This election has showed us that both parties are racist. They use the issue of race and racism in different ways, but they do it for the same goal, which is to try and distract and divide the working class, and to distract from the real enemy, which is not your fellow worker, but the elites, the capitalist class who control both the Democrats and the Republicans.